Welcome to Chasing Billy. I'm your host, Cardigan Kid. Today we have an amazing episode for you guys. Last week I was able to speak with Daniel Weber, the actor who plays Jessie Evans on MGM Plus's series Billy the Kid, starring Tom Blythe as Billy the Kid. And we just sat down for a chat and talked about history, what he learned and studied to bring what he does to the role, and just in general about his whole experience. Daniel is the nicest dude. I want to just extend my deepest thanks to him for coming on the show and taking the time out of his schedule to talk to me about this niche in history that we all care about. So without further ado, I'll get to the interview. But just again, thank you to Daniel Weber, and thanks to everybody for watching. And stick around because this Billy the Kid show is just going to get more interesting, I think. Take it easy. Hey,
Hello, hello. How
what's happening?
you doing, mate?
Good. So you just wake up and hit the ground running, huh?
Yeah, man. We're the day is short, right? The early bird gets the worm, I think.
Thanks so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you know what? I was excited to talk because I know how much of a passion you and your
Yeah.
mates have for the subject. So like I'm just excited to talk to you and hear what your thoughts are and just throw backwards and forwards what we think about Jesse in this world.
Absolutely. Well, Daniel Weber, for folks who don't know, who haven't seen the show, you play Jessie Evans on MGM Plus's Billy the Kid series, which we're in season 2 now, and I think I've caught up with all the episodes that are out. The Battle of Lincoln, not to give any spoilers away too much, but was fantastic and
Yeah.
suspenseful.
Oh, it's
But
still coming. There's still more to come.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I bet we got a lot more to come. But it's an interesting show.
Mm.
They're throwing in things like Pat Garrett makes an appearance on the scene way
Yes,
earlier than
sure.
typically, and it's interesting to see how they're playing him into the story.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite scenes with you cornering Beaudry behind the rock as you chase him around the rock.
Yeah, that's yeah, mine too, honestly. I mean, that's a very cool, that's straight out of Pat Garrett's book about Billy the Kid. It became a more intense and darker scene than Pat writes about. Pat writes it as it's almost like an impossible thing, which is sort of what builds part of the myth of Billy the Kid, right? Billy the Kid comes screaming down this this cliffside. Jesse's got Charlie, uh, held with a pistol, and all of a sudden they hear this war whoop, and this horse, which seems to have no rider, comes bolting down the hill. Uh, all the while, Billy the Kid's shooting, and at Jesse's boys, and then he comes up coolly next to Jesse, swings up onto his horse, comes up, pistol drawn, pointing at Jesse. Jesse's got his pointed at him, and it's this great little standoff, and there's really witty backwards and forwards about what to do with the situation.
Honestly, man, Jesse Evans, you may be the first portrayal of Jesse in the Billy the Kid film world. He's
I
really not
think
looked at a lot.
he's not at all. I mean, I think there's one. Honestly, I've never seen it. I'm not a huge. I didn't grow up watching Western, so I don't know who it was.
Mhm.
But I believe there's one other, like tiny bit part, sort of. That's Jesse Evans in the corner of the shot, sort of like he's never really talked about, which is so strange. I find it so. There's not a lot of books about him, which I find
No.
strange. Well, I mean, Billy the Kid was, had the position of honor as the top gunfighter really on the
Mhm.
Tunstall side, and Jesse had the equal position on the opposite side, and they both had a really, um, I mean, consequential sort of rivalry in this sort of battle, the Lincoln County battle. It surprised me that he's not talked. I think it's partly because there's so little known about him. You don't have
Very
anything
little.
much from his past. We don't even really know where he was born. Um, and then we don't know what happens to him, just after the Lincoln County War. He's around for another year or so in
Yep.
Texas, and then he walks out of history. So he's one of the enigmas of the Old West. So I
He
think
really
there's
is.
a lot for people to grab onto.
Yeah. And I mean he walks out of jail in 1882 or so and walks out of history and just disappears. And
Yeah.
that's, maybe that had something to do with it because Billy went down in a, well, I hate to say blaze of glory, but well, he went down with Pat and it was sensationalized and a legend
Yeah.
was allowed to grow. But I mean, Jesse just kind of disappeared. And but you said you didn't grow up watching westerns. What was your familiarity with Billy the Kid and that whole mythos before you knew about this role?
Pretty limited. Yeah, fairly limited. And the same to be said for Old West frontier history in America. Didn't really, obviously we all know about Billy the Kid. We used to have ice creams, which are called Buffalo Bills, which was basically, oh no, that would have been Wild Bill Hickok, actually, now I think about it. But, there's interesting little, uh, it infiltrates over here, even in storytelling and pop culture sort of references the Old West, but not outside of like him being a young gunslinger. I couldn't have told you anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you get this role and you look into it, you research Jesse and Billy, and you eventually make a trip to Lincoln. Um,
Hmm.
do you find that the story and the myth and the history of it all ropes you in any? I mean, did you find it
Oh,
just intriguing or
I
you know?
I am still enthralled by
Mm,
the story. It's one of those narratives which, if you didn't embellish anything in Hollywood and storytelling, would be an amazing read. It's one of those stories where fact is stranger than fiction, and
yes.
such a it's an enormous story,
Mm,
politically, bureaucratically, county wise, or like state wise. It was a
mhm.
global news sense story. This was a massive. It was a massive period of time. It's what grabbed me. I mean, I'm enthralled by when I got this, I did a lot of research, obviously. And so that started with looking into the history of the Old West, looking into the Civil War period, Reconstruction, and then after that, you're obviously getting a bit more detailed and myopic, looking into Lincoln County War, Billy the Kid, and then trying to with Jesse. It's you. I had to read. I don't know how many books I've read on Billy the Kid now, just to find little pieces of Jessie Evans in there. And then you start to see the different stories that connect, the through lines. There's two biographies on Jesse.
Mm,
One's not really a biography. The other one is, made up of newspaper clips, essentially from that period. And he was, they're talking about him from I think 77 in a the newspapers were sort of hunting him at that point. He had a very
yeah.
funny relationship with the papers, and uh, I can't remember the reporter's name, but he basically had it out for him. Both of them, like
Fountain.
Fountain, yes, yeah, yeah, AJ Fountain, and Jesse was, I'm going to send you to hell, mate, if you keep writing this stuff, and he kept writing this stuff, and it's very
Yeah.
witty. He'd sort of parody him or satire Jesse and call him Captain Evans, and he'd write him
Mhm.
these crazy speeches to his boys, and so it's a really funny relationship reading that, and you get a sense of who he was from those. But yeah, my interest is so peaked to do with this
Yeah.
period. I mean, he's we grew up with this sort of character in Australia as well. Our famous, we've got a few famous sort of outlaws, Ned
Ned
Kelly being
Kelly.
one, obviously. Um, and I've always, I've done my own research into him over here, and I've been to his sites, with the Glen Rowan site and whatnot. So yeah, it's absolutely been in the back of my mind. we have that, we're a penal colony originally. We have that sort of past, and so it's I think very much in the forefront of the Australian imagination. Uh, so this is kind of a treat of a job to get. You never know how a writer will treat a character like Jessie, because Jessie on paper could be
Yes.
a very two-dimensional villain
Mhm.
if he wasn't handled well. And when you get to work with people like Michael Hurst, you watch his shows, things like Vikings,
Mhm.
Elizabeth, and he's quite impartial to his characters, which I love. He's non-judgmental. He really likes to examine them, not say this guy's evil, this woman's evil. Like, he just says, look at this person, look at what they did. You guys can decide. Let's just he has a huge passion, a huge love for the history. And what made me want to do this, was because I had a sense that he would actually try and flesh out somebody like Jessie Evans. I mean, I'm excited to tell this story because I mean, I find him so much fun to play for a start. But as time goes on and the more stuff I read, uh, I feel a bit of, like you were saying, nobody's played this character before, so it's fresh ground to tread. And I really can try and put a stamp on the character and interpret, give my interpretation of who he was. I really, the ambition was to try and make him feel like this is what an outlaw should is like. This
Yeah.
is want him to epitomize outlawry in a way maybe we've not seen on screen. It's a big task. It's a bit of
Yeah.
an ambitious task. I don't know if that's possible, but that's the idea, is like, how can we try and make people feel like these are the guys that this is the sort of characters that history had for us back then, in all of their glory, good, bad, and ugly. Like, there is some awful things about these sort of characters, but then also there's a lot of interesting, compelling counter stories to them. So I just trying to flesh that out and trying to articulate that sort of story. Almost like the gentleman outlaw aspect of him,
Yeah.
which hasn't been seen. The
Well,
romantic, I always see him as a bit of a romantic.
I think you are. I think you're definitely fleshing him out because, like you said, he could be written. You also find in history there's a bit, because we know so little about him, and have so few source documents, that he is kind of a 2D character if you really want to leave
Yeah.
it there. And what I find, I think it was kind of a sneak move on your part in the show, because Jesse Evans and his character, I think, crept up on the viewers in a way that probably was unexpected, because I've talked to so many people. I run a Facebook group on Facebook about Billy the Kid, and obviously the show's a big topic sometimes, and I
Mm.
hear so many people say Jesse Evans is my favorite character in the series right now,
Oh,
because
that's
and
good.
I don't think anyone would ever have expected that, but I
Mm.
think there's a depth that you bring to him, because unlike Billy, he's not conflicted about his outlawry. Like, he's already
No.
seems to have gotten to a place of like, this is who I am, but
Yeah.
at the same time there is a conflict in him somehow, where, you see that he's not happy about the way things might have turned out between him and Billy, or
Mm.
he's not always seems to be happy about how things are, but he's accepted his position more than Billy, and that might
Mm.
bring more of an air of like, I don't know what it is but it really catches on with people, and I think you've done an amazing job at it, at bringing that to life, because Jesse could be a 2D character, and man,
Yeah.
the show, he's one of my favorite characters, and he's a lot of folks' favorite character.
I it's a pretty, it was even from, you asked before if my interest was sort of peaked in it. And I think just the very bare bones of the story got me, which was the relationship with Billy. It's these guys who, find themselves together early on, and historically we kind of have moved Jesse forward a little bit as far as when they met. Um, but two guys who sort of find each other in this really rough world, work together, bond together, creates some sort of brotherhood and a balance of equality of power to some extent. Like there's a respect in their early formation. They do build a respect for each other's, I think, intelligence and
Yeah.
wiliness, as well as the I say, I kind of like talk about it as like somebody you can go over the cliff with, somebody
Mhm.
who's gonna go over the cliff with you. Like that's the bond that they create early on. And then they obviously get separated. So it's like this journey from friends and allies to enemies, which that becomes its own interesting, bitter rivalry. And then obviously down in history when Jesse gets put in prison in Huntsville,
Mhm.
they have writing, they have a letter from a guard saying that he intercepted a letter from Jesse written to a guy called Antrim.
Yeah.
Um, the guy didn't know who Antrim was, but he was worried that he was going to come and break Jesse out of prison, and then obviously Billy didn't. But so just that journey is to me that relationship, like what it like that's a beautiful story right there.
Yes.
Um, Trying to flesh that out, and there's just when you start to look at it, there's so many uh parts of history that sort of emphasize that. There was a saying back then that has to do with both their levels of skill as pistoleros, that like one's afraid and the other one's glad of it, right? Like the idea that both could kill each other, both didn't want a real showdown. They could do it, but and they never like actually articulate who's afraid of who. Like they both don't want this. They want it and they don't want it. It's a really interesting dynamic. I think Jesse is at this stage of his life, he's still trying to make a name for himself. Um, he's still trying to put himself on the map, at least within our story.
Yeah.
Try and make something of himself. And so it's like, you can have everything you want, Jesse. You can have the money, the power, the name, recognition, but you just have to kill Billy the Kid, your friend. It's a
Exactly.
really good premise for a story. Um,
Oh, that's one of the central themes of this show, and I'm glad that they're doing that because, it's often overlooked, and there's so many ways they could focus on Billy's romance with, in this case, Dulcinea, and
mhm,
or Billy's rivalry with Pat Garrett. But then
mhm.
I like that there's a focus on the friendship between he and Jesse Evans. But
Hit,
what mystifies me, and from a historical perspective, is that they were such friends. At least hypothetically, ride or die, and then they're on opposite sides. Jesse Evans is with the folks that kill Tunstall. Billy swears revenge. They fight. There's peace. Evans and Campbell kill Houston Chapman. Billy turns state's evidence, makes a deal with Wallace, testifies against Evans. Evans escapes. Evans gets arrested and writes Billy the Kid to rescue him. I mean, it's like there's this loyalty that even transcends like what side you're on, and
oh, yeah,
there's
absolutely. Yeah, and I read this, in one of his books not that long ago. There's a letter that Weidenman wrote somebody. I can't remember who he's writing to. An enigma to me because there's not a lot of references to stuff like this, but he literally says Jesse Evans is doing all he can for us. Say nothing to anyone or something. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along those lines. It's towards the end of the war from memory. But there's a hint that he is maybe to some extent helping the other side.
yeah.
Um, and I think I don't know, there's a case to be made. I would love to have kind of play with this more, and maybe we get to at some point next season, but like play around with the idea of the performance that Jesse has to put on, the show he has to put on
Mhm.
to be the big man, to be the leader of the Seven Rivers, to be the front man of the house, the sort of show that he has to put on of really the bravado and the vitriol that he can demonstrate. Maybe he doesn't act out he's not violently, he's not attacking whatnot, but he can seem to be that. So like playing with the theater of being a leader and
Mhm.
being against Billy the Kid, I think is an interesting, who knows how if there was any version of that. But I like, especially without like the story we're telling,
Mm.
trying to you know, because ultimately if he crosses the fence, he's now got a gun to the back of his head. So it's
Yeah.
it's he's got to walk a fairly tight rope. This is the world of gangsters, and there's you don't get forgiven very easily. You don't get forgiven in that world.
I love watching the scenes in the show where you've got Murphy and Riley and to some extent Katrin, and they talk to Jesse like he's just a simple hired gun, and then you see in your reaction the kind of kind of like the weighing the possibilities of like, do I just drop this guy right now? Like they don't know the fire they're playing with, you know?
No, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and I love, like I said, your portrayal really brings this idea that Jesse's okay with being an outlaw, and he's just trying to figure out like, do I just shoot this guy or let him talk to me this way? And
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I think that that's a very thought out sort of like it has to be there as well. I mean, it's one thing to be the I guess the antagonist for Billy in the show, but really like Jesse this, especially this season. I think this season he's unchained, and he's
yeah,
not taking any real lead from anybody this season. He's I think last season, in some ways, if you looked at it from the point of view of leadership, like he has a very loose gloved approach on like leadership, almost like lead from the front and lead, be the first to battle, but not pushing your agenda too much on people, because there's sort of like an ease and a cool effortlessness even in the historical writings of him that I wanted there. But then but what happens with that eventually is that Billy supersedes him in some ways as the leader. Like he ends up having to deal with Billy in that sense.
yeah,
Uh, and I think this season is like, well, I'm not going to do it that way this time. And it's like he's unchained. Billy's not, sort of Billy's a bit of a moral conscience for him in the first season, and he doesn't have that this season. This season, we get to see who I
yeah,
think is more Jesse Evans that we have from history. So it's really important to show the fearsome sort of aspects of him, because while Billy was renowned for being a great gun shooter, Jesse was known to be more fearsome. A lot of
yes,
everybody said it. Even Sheriff Brady said he would rather arrest Billy the Kid 100 times over than go and arrest Jesse Evans again.
yeah,
He was trouble, and he was a ferocious enemy.
yeah,
Um, so really trying to play with that aspect. These guys are just paying the bills. The house is just paying the bills.
yeah,
They
yeah,
might have a gun on their hip, but the reality is these guys are the warriors. They're the men in the trenches.
yes.
They thrive on having their back up against the wall, and for now he's paying the bills, so he doesn't get shot. But if he ever stops
I'm
paying those
interested
bills,
I'm interested to see. I know I don't know how much you're greenlit to say, but has season 3 been approved? Is it in the works or
we're still, I think, waiting to hear what we're doing.
Mhm.
I know everybody is on board already as far as the writing side,
Cool.
producers. We're all attached already, so it's really up to the streamers
Yeah.
like Amazon to make that
Yeah.
call. But yeah, it's above my pay grade to
Yeah.
know, really.
Very
Uh,
interested to see where Jesse goes in season 3
mm,
as it
Me too.
just
Me
amps up.
too.
And
Yeah.
and like I said, they brought Pat Garrett in early. So it's like I'm just a lot of conjecture about how they're going to pace that story of, Billy and Pat and then Jesse still in the picture, and there's a lot to play with there.
Mm.
So, it'll be interesting for sure. I really love, growing up for me, I got into Billy the Kid when I was a kid because of the Young Guns movies.
Mhm.
and that was my gateway to the myth. You know, Billy the Kid is a myth. It's and it's the myth that gets us into history. And you know, thankfully, folks like you and Tom and Michael Hurst are making a new myth happen for Billy the
Mm.
Kid. And I know quite a few people who have said the Billy the Kid show got me into Billy the Kid, and
Mm.
you know, they're reading the books and they're digging into the history, and it's folks who keep telling the story like you guys that really reignite that, and it's
Yeah.
just fantastic to see.
What's cool is Michael is, I think, telling more of the story than most people have got to see on screen.
Hmm.
I think being in it, it's such a, and we could be doing a 20 episode season to try and
Right.
fill in all of the details. I mean, there's so much history that's we have to kind of race past because we just don't have time. There's
Yeah.
so many more rich characters that you could keep on diving into. But even at least in the eight episode sort of arc that we have for a season, we get to get into a lot more of the politics. We get to get into the stories like Jessie Evans, people like
Hmm.
that who have had to be missed because really it's Pat and Billy's story, and it's been Pat and Billy's story for 100 years now. But
Hmm.
there's some amazing figures in that story outside of those guys. Pat, Jesse Evans, and Susan McSween, and there's George Coe, who's like got a
Right.
great book about this whole thing. Like, there's so many other characters we could just keep on talking about, and people
Hmm.
who went on to have consequential lives after that. Susan McSween was the cattle queen of New
Yeah.
Mexico. So we get to tell a little bit more, I think, than we've seen. Normally it focuses in on Billy's outlaw years. I mean, to be honest, I haven't watched enough of Billy the Kid's films. I didn't really want to be too
That's
impacted
yeah,
by
fantastic. Yeah.
by
You don't
those.
you don't want that to influence your, your work, right?
I was more interested in the gangster films, into gang films, or real life gang documentaries or pirate documentaries. These guys are the pirates of the prairies, and
Nice.
and the gang cultures. You look at some of the gang cultures in Rio, and this is partly how I went into season one, with a bit of a looser family feel approach, I guess. Like, we're all just a family of brothers. Because you look at some of the gangs down there, and it's not all serious looks and angry people. These guys are having so much fun. They're kids having the best time of their lives. Um, there's a lot of drama that happens in between, but trying to bring that like freshness, fun element to
Mhm.
it. This season, it gets more depth to it, gets more serious.
Mhm.
Now there's vendettas, now there's blood in the water, and um, but yeah, sort of approaching it that way.
It's really it's cool to see on the screen how different they make, you know, Lincoln look, and how they,
Yes.
it brings in a lot of stuff, and like you said, moving at a pace of 8 episodes a season, it's like it moves so fast, you're watching it, you're like, "Oh, is this Blazers Mill already? Like this is where we
Yes.
are." But
Yes.
you've
Yes.
real quick, you've been to Lincoln. You've been a lot more places than me, I guarantee. When I went, I found it to be pretty uniquely magical. Did you have any kind of sense of the uniqueness of that place? I mean, how did you find Lincoln?
I had a really cool time down in Lincoln. I went we had Christmas before we finished shooting season two, the back end of it, so the winter season. And I had 5 days, and I was like, I'm just gonna run down to New Mexico. So I ran down completely randomly. I booked an Airbnb that was literally next to Billy the Kid's grave. It's 100 meters
Wow.
from the grave site, so I slept overnight next to the grave, and then went down south, down to Lincoln. Got an amazing tour through there by some of the locals,
Mhm.
and some of the main guys in charge of the sites there. Just from pure circumstances, meeting people, and hearing stories, and getting taken to all the different spots where the people were killed, where all the different historical moments. Seeing the house was quite the big house, as they
Yeah.
called it.
Yeah.
That was quite cool to see. I don't want to say who dies because that would spoil some things for some people who don't know much about the history. But yeah, I loved it. I mean, I really loved going in. So I went to Fort Stanton and saw Fort Stanton. One of the one of the most the best touch points for Jesse for me was when I went down into Ruidoso because I wanted to go and see Blazers Mill, and
Mhm.
that sort of go down. I went and saw Blazers Mill, and that was amazing. Still partly there, bits and pieces of it. Um, but
Yep.
then that night, I was driving to my Airbnb, and I was driving through the mountains, and it was snowing, which I was very pleased to see, because and it was snowing a lot. I almost got stuck in Ruidoso in the mountains. So anybody who says New Mexico doesn't snow, they don't know what they're talking about. But no, what was really cool was as I was driving, there was this herd of wild Mustang there in the pine forests, and so I pulled off the road,
Wow.
kind of went walking up through toward, spent 40 minutes with these wild Mustang, and it's just one of those, you know, Jesse Evans robbed from the Indian agents from the Indian
He did.
reservations for John Chisholm there with Billy the Kid. They stole horses from them. So this is like it's one of those things where you're like, this is literally what he would have seen 120 years ago, 140 years ago. That's literally the image he would have seen was horses in the bush in the wild.
Surreal.
And just like those small little touch points,
Mhm.
which sort of connect you a little bit deeper to the story and to the characters. It was a really special sort of journey. Tom did his own in season one, and it was a
Mhm.
lockdown, so I couldn't actually go.
Mhm.
And I'm actually glad I didn't get to go the first season because you drive past Brewers Ranch or you drive past something to do with Sheriff Brady, like all these names I wouldn't have known back then. Whereas
Right.
now, 2 years in, having done a lot of reading, all of these names jump out at you, and you know that what they mean and what significance they have.
But I really appreciate you coming on and talking. You've been one of my favorite actors since your portrayal of Lee Harvey Oswald in
Oh, thanks, man.
11/22
Oh, cheers.
63. So I think you're a great actor, and I'm glad that you have brought some depth and life to Jesse Evans, and that you've taken the time to study this and to get to know the history and to, put some substance behind the work. That's really awesome. And just want to thank you
Yeah,
for what
that's my
you're doing with
joy.
the
That's my
show.
joy. It's what I do it for.
Yeah. So
So I appreciate
thanks.
it.
Thanks for coming on, man. And you're always welcome back. And we'll be watching.
I'll just finish before we go. And by the way, you and your friends and everybody who's passionate, keep on digging. I want to find more about Jesse. You guys are the trailblazers with that stuff. But I'll just finish with a quick little story about you said one of your favorite scenes was the shooting of Tunstall.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean we spoke last night, and I'd sent you that the image of Tunstall on the hill. I mean, it's one of those pivotal moments in the story in history for the Lincoln County of the killing of John Tunstall, and they never know who killed him. Like it's never explicitly said that Jesse's part of the posse, but he wasn't involved. He says, and you
Hmm.
know, I think Tom Hill and Frank Baker normally get pinned for
Right.
having done it, but we kind of came to the conclusion this season that it's a pretty powerful moment if Jesse is to kill Billy the Kid's father figure, so to speak, and it's a real challenge for him to try and suppress that rage and not kill Jesse, and not have it out. So we decided, yeah, let's have him kill uh kill Tunstall. And it's one of those moments that happens every now and then when you're shooting a film. You feel like you're sort of touching history to some extent, or the ghost of the past without getting too, you know, superstitious, sort of coming back to keep an eye on things. We were shooting this scene, and Jesse and the boys ride up to meet Tunstall on his horse. And we're up on this big hill in Canada, and we were currently about to get shut down. The production was about to get shut down. We had a hard out. You cannot work past this time because the actor strike was happening.
Mm.
So we had a very short period of time with which to get this pivotal scene. And so there was a crazy energy on set of everybody just like, oh, we're gonna get this. Oh. And then to add into the mix, we have a storm literally slowly coming in from the Rocky Mountains and then progressively circling around our knoll, on our hill, sorry, for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours of filming had for that day. Um, and we've got wind, we've got rain, and there's lightning and thunder, and it's so portentous to the moment. It seemed to just suit the moment so perfectly. I put on Instagram this morning this great image of Tunstall on his horse with a bolt of lightning behind him. That sort of speaks to that moment. But it was just one of those moments where felt like we were telling history. We were sort of trying and history had something to say about it to some extent. It
Yes.
was echoing back, and it was a very cool moment. It was a very incredible scene to shoot, and I'm very glad of the choices that we made in how it went about, and who killed him. And because my take on it is that Jesse probably did shoot the guy. Um, it makes a lot of sense to do it. But anyway, I just wanted to finish with that story since it was one of your
Yes.
favorite
And those
scenes.
those moments are real, man. And this stuff, there's magic in this stuff. So thanks for being a
Mm,
part of it.
hell
All
yeah,
right.
absolutely. Well, all the best, and thanks for the chat. Nice to meet
Oh,
you.
thank you, man. Get back to your busy day ahead of you.
Cheers. Thank you.
We'll
See
see
you.
you.